What if one cartoon was so groundbreaking that every studio scrambled to copy it? When the Flintstones stormed television in the early 1960s, it rewrote the rules. Suddenly, animation wasn't just for kids. It was primetime suburbia with stone wheels. And networks wanted in. From futuristic families to serial mascots in disguise, everyone tried to capture that bedrock lightning. But did they succeed? Or just stumble in the shadows? Let's uncover 15 copycats that chased the Flintstone dream. The Jetsons, 1962. What if Bedrock had flying cars? That was the elevator pitch for the Jetsons. Hanna-Barbera didn't just copy their own hit, they fast-forwarded it. Fred's dinosaur dishwasher became Rosie the Robot Maid. The quarry commute turned into George Jetson stuck on the cosmic treadmill of spacely sprockets. It was suburban life dressed in neon. But the skeleton of the Flintstones was showing through. The family structure was identical. George and Jane bickered in the same rhythm as Fred and Wilma. Judy Jetson was Pebbles aged up, with teenage fashion drama swapped for Stone Age diaper jokes. Even Astro the dog was basically Dino with a rocket-powered bark. The show leaned on the same sitcom beats. Dad bungles, wife fixes, kids complicate, all wrapped up by the closing credits. What set the Jetsons apart was the futuristic setting. The animators had a blast dreaming up gadgets. Moving sidewalks, video calls, and flat-screen TVs seemed like gags in 1962, but many of them ended up predicting real life. Critics at the time, however, called it a glossy Flintstones repaint. Audiences only got one season before it was canceled, though reruns in the 80s turned it into a retro cult favorite. Cultural impact? Immense. It showed that the Flintstones model was elastic enough to stretch across time periods, but it also proved that without Fred's gruff charisma, the formula could feel too light, too mechanical. The Jetsons promised the future, but carried the unmistakable DNA of bedrock. Top Cat, 1961. Imagine the Flintstones, but swap cavemen for alley cats in New York. That's Top Cat in a nutshell. Hanna-Barbera, again pulled from their winning recipe, a tight-knit group, a cranky authority figure, and misadventures that always circle back to status quo. Instead of Fred vs. Mr. Slate, we had Top Cat vs. Officer Dibble, a never-ending duel of schemes and slapdowns. The cats lived like a sitcom family. They shared meals, fought over chores, pulled cons that backfired, and stuck together no matter what. Top Cat himself had Fred Flintstone's bluster and ego, right down to the harebrained plans that collapsed in comedic flames. Dibble was the sitcom neighbor, always popping in to shake his fist. Every episode was less about crime and more about community, just with fur and street slang. What critics noticed was how blatantly the show borrowed Bedrock's bones. Even the laugh rhythms felt familiar, but the urban alleyway setting gave it a sharper edge, a streetwise spin that made it stand out. The jazzy theme song, slick dialogue, and Hanna-Barbera's bold move to spotlight an anti-hero cat gave Top Cat a charm that outlived its short run. Despite lasting only one season, Top Cat became a syndication giant overseas, especially in Latin America, where it aired for decades. It proved the Flintstones mold could handle a little grit, and that even copycats could find their own strange immortality. In the end, Top Cat wasn't Bedrock with cats. It was Bedrock's cousin who ran a hustle downtown. Calvin and the Colonel, 1961. What if the Flintstones formula wore a disguise? That was Calvin and the Colonel, a sitcom about two anthropomorphic animals, a fox and a bear, who mirrored Ralph Cramden and Ed Norton from The Honeymooners. Sound familiar? Yes, it was practically the Flintstones' blueprint in another skin. Calvin, the scheming fox, cooked up plans that always collapsed, dragging his nervous pal Colonel the Bear along for the ride. Their wives rolled their eyes, dished wisdom, and made sure the household didn't collapse. The setup was so close to Fred and Barney's antics with Wilma and Betty that critics immediately called it out. But here's the kicker. Calvin and the Colonel actually recycled voice talent and material from an earlier live-action series called Amos and Andy. To dodge controversy, the show re-skinned the characters as cartoon animals. That meant the domestic bickering, get-rich schemes, and neighborhood scrapes played out exactly like Bedrock's. just minus the stone wheels. The show never found its footing. Audiences were confused, critics were unimpressed, and network executives yanked it after a few months. It never got the rerun afterlife that Top Cat enjoyed, leaving it more of a trivia question than a classic. Still, its existence proves the hunger for Flintstones-style sitcom animation was real. Everyone wanted the same buddy dynamic formula. But Calvin and the Colonel showed that if you strip away the charm and cleverness, all you're left with is a hollow copy. The Alvin Show, 1961. Before the Chipmunks conquered pop charts, they tried to live in Bedrock's neighborhood. The Alvin Show was CBS's attempt to blend the music craze of the early 60s with Flintstones-style domestic comedy. Alvin was the Fred Flintstone of the group. Loud, impulsive, always chasing glory. Simon and Theodore played the straight men, echoing Barney's exasperated loyalty. The family framework was clear. Dave Seville, their human guardian, was the Wilma role trying to keep order, while Alvin derailed everything. Each episode balanced zany adventures with musical interludes, creating a rhythm not unlike Pebbles and Bam Bam's later band antics. What really tethered it to the Flintstones model was the sitcom plotting. Alvin would scheme maybe to win a contest or impress a girl, mess it up spectacularly, and Dave would scold him with the iconic yell, "Alvin, sound familiar?" It was the same loop of problem, blunder, and reset that made Bedrock tick. Critically, the show had mixed reviews. The music segments popped, but the limited animation drew complaints. Still, Alvin's brash personality gave it staying power. While the show only lasted one season, the characters became cultural juggernauts. The Chipmunks went on to sell millions of records, star in multiple revivals, and outlive most Flintstones imitators. The Alvin Show proves that even a thin Flintstones copy could stumble into its own legacy if the hook was strong enough. It wasn't prehistoric, but it carried the same Stone Age sitcom DNA. Alvin didn't live in Bedrock, but he definitely borrowed Fred's playbook. Hoppity Hooper, 1964. What if the Flintstones had been a traveling roadshow with talking animals? Enter Hoppity Hooper, a J. Ward cartoon about a frog, a fox, and a bear who traveled from town to town, landing in sitcom-style scrapes. The setup was family light, but the rhythms were pure Flintstones. Hoppity was the naive stand-in for Pebbles, while his sidekicks Fillmore the bear and Waldo the fox carried Fred and Barney's bickering buddy energy. Every episode involved a harebrained plan, a bumbling adventure, and a gentle reset by the end. The humor leaned on puns, slapstick, and character-driven clashes rather than edge or danger. Ward's signature satire was present, but watered down compared to Rocky and Bullwinkle. The censors made sure Hoppity never crossed the line, keeping the antics feather-light. That's where the Flintstones' shadow loomed. Safe humor, safe endings, safe families. Audiences wanted Bedrock's comfort food, and Hoppity delivered the off-brand version. The show lasted 2 years in syndication, making it longer-lived than some of its peers. But it never broke into the cultural mainstream. Critics dismissed it as Rocky and Bullwinkle light, while kids enjoyed its talking animal charm. Cultural impact? Modest, but important. It proved that the Flintstones sitcom model could be stapled onto anything, even a frog in a top hat. But without Fred's raw charisma or Wilma's sharp wit, Hoppity Hooper faded into memory. It's the kind of show you stumble on in old VHS compilations, a relic of the 60s rush to bottle that Bedrock magic. The Beanie and Cecil Show, 1962. Take a sea serpent, give him sitcom instincts, and you've got Beanie and Cecil. Bob Clampett's creation was pitched as a wacky kids cartoon, but if you look closely, it leaned heavily on the Flintstones' rhythm. Cecil the seasick serpent was basically Fred Flintstone if Fred lived underwater, big, bumbling, and always crashing into trouble with a goofy grin. The show's formula hit all the same beats: characters chasing half-baked plans, comic misunderstandings, and a reset that sent everyone back to square one. The humor was built on anachronisms and sly references, just like Bedrock's dinosaurs doubling as vacuum cleaners. In Cecil's world, high-tech gadgets worked like old-school contraptions, a mirror of the Flintstones' gag structure. What made Beanie and Cecil stand out was its fourth wall breaking. Characters would wink at the audience, poke fun at TV tropes, and even call out the network. That gave it an edgier flavor than the ultra-domesticated Flintstones, but the skeleton was still the same. Instead of a Stone Age suburb, you had a nautical playground. The show was short-lived, lasting only one season on ABC. Critics loved its creativity but noted its recycled sitcom core. Kids adored the absurdity, while parents rolled their eyes at the slapstick chaos. Cultural impact? Modest but long-lasting. Beanie and Cecil lived on in syndication and influenced later satirical cartoons. Still, it remains one of those Flintstones-adjacent oddities, proof that if you dressed Fred Flintstone in scales and flippers, you could still milk laughs from the same tired gags. The Funny Company, 1963. What if the Flintstones formula moved into a clubhouse? That was The Funny Company, a show built around a group of kids solving problems with slapstick teamwork. Swap the suburban family for a club of archetypal kids, the brainy one, the bossy one, the comic relief, and suddenly you had Fred, Wilma, Barney, and Betty in miniature. Each episode followed the exact same loop. The kids ran into a dilemma. Maybe they needed money for the clubhouse, maybe they wanted to help a neighbor. Then came a goofy plan, total chaos, and a neatly wrapped-up solution. Sound familiar? It's Bedrock's problem plan payoff rhythm, just with kids instead of cavemen. The show tried to set itself apart with educational content. Between the gags, the kids would launch into little informational shorts, teaching viewers about history, science, or geography. It was the Flintstones sitcom model smuggled into an after-school lesson plan. Critics called it lightweight, but networks loved the safe moral tone. Kids got a laugh, parents got reassurance, and the studio got an easy Flintstones knockoff. Cultural impact? Slim, but it paved the way for later clubhouse cartoons like Scooby-Doo's Mystery Inc. It proved that you didn't need a caveman setting to borrow the Flintstones' bones, just a group, a clubhouse, and endless recycled sitcom beats. The Nutnik Show, 1965. What if Fred Flintstone was a silent clown in modern times? That's The Nutnik Show, Gene Deitch's attempt to blend Charlie Chaplin-style pantomime with the sitcom bumbling formula. Nutnik, the hapless everyman, stumbled through everyday problems, fixing a car, paying the rent, trying to cook, always ending in disaster, but never in despair. Strip away the prehistoric gadgets, and it's Fred Flintstone in overalls. The comedy came from his incompetence, his stubbornness, and his endless optimism even when things fell apart. Like Bedrock, each episode reset at zero. No matter how badly Nutnik messed up, by the end he was smiling again, ready for next week's fiasco. The show leaned heavily on visual gags rather than dialogue. That gave it a different flavor, but also made it less sticky for audiences accustomed to wisecracks from Fred and Barney. Critics admired the artistry, but admitted it lacked punch. Nutnik never became a household name. The shorts were syndicated, sometimes aired between other cartoons, and eventually faded from memory. But they serve as a curious case study. Even when stripped of words, the Flintstones sitcom loop, everyman bungles, chaos ensues, status quo restored, still lingered underneath. Cultural impact? Tiny, but film buffs appreciate Nutnik as an experiment. For our countdown, it's another reminder of how the Flintstones' DNA spread into corners of animation you wouldn't expect. Sinbad Jr. and his Magic Belt, 1965. Now picture Bedrock as a Saturday morning adventure. Sinbad Jr. and his Magic Belt took the familiar family-friendly sitcom rhythm and pasted it onto a superhero story. Sinbad was a boy adventurer who, with a tug of his belt, grew to giant size. His loyal parrot Salty provided comic relief, echoing Barney's exasperated sidekick role. Episodes followed a simple pattern. Sinbad's heroics would go wrong, Salty would panic, and together they'd fumble toward victory. The stakes were adventure-style pirates, villains, daring escapes, but the underlying beats were Flintstones sitcom loops. Hero messes up, sidekick complains, crisis resolves neatly before the credits. What made it stand out was its hybrid identity. It wanted to be action-packed, but censors defanged any real danger. Instead, the show leaned on slapstick, miscommunication, and comic resets, exactly what kept Fred and Wilma's arguments feather light. The animation was cheap, the storytelling formulaic, and critics panned it as Flintstones in a cape. Still, kids loved the fantasy hook. The show ran for 2 seasons in syndication, proving the Flintstones model could even stretch into superhero territory. Cultural impact? Limited, but it's remembered fondly by those who grew up watching. It's one of those shows that illustrates how every studio in the 60s tried to Frankenstein the Flintstones template into anything that might stick. The new Casper Cartoon Show, 1963. Take Casper the Friendly Ghost and give him a suburban sitcom glow. That's what the new Casper Cartoon Show did. While Casper had been around since the 40s in theatrical shorts, the 60s TV revival put him squarely in the Flintstones orbit. Casper's world became less spooky and more sitcom. Episodes revolved around everyday scrapes helping a friend, proving himself to skeptical neighbors, solving harmless mysteries. The formula was textbook Flintstones. Casper tries to help, chaos follows, but harmony is restored by the end. The show even borrowed the comic pet role, with side characters like Wendy the Good Little Witch and Spooky providing the kind of banter Fred and Barney once carried. Instead of caveman gadgets, you had ghostly magic that functioned like household appliances. The overlap was too close to miss. Critics noted how sanitized the show felt. Casper's original bittersweet edge, the lonely ghost looking for acceptance, was scrubbed into lighthearted fluff. It became safe Saturday morning comfort food, following the Flintstones model of inoffensive, recyclable domestic comedy. Cultural impact was modest but lasting. The show kept Casper relevant for a new generation and paved the way for later revivals. But let's be honest, it was bedrock with cobwebs. Just as the Addams Family cartoon in the 70s would dilute its gothic edge, Casper in the 60s showed how every property could be remodeled into Flintstone light. The Mighty Hercules, 1963. What if Fred Flintstone was ripped and lived in ancient Greece? That was The Mighty Hercules, a low-budget syndicated cartoon that tried to merge mythology with the sitcom-light pacing of bedrock. Hercules battled villains like Daedalus or Nemesis, but the format stayed shockingly close to suburban comedy beats. Instead of Wilma's steady hand, Hercules had Helena, a supportive love interest who often grounded him. Newton the Centaur filled the comic sidekick role, squawking like Barney on a sugar rush. Each episode followed the same loop. Hercules faces a threat, miscalculates, Newton panics, then a final burst of strength saves the day. The real Flintstones echo was in tone. Despite the mythical setting, the humor and pacing leaned on domestic comedy rhythms. Hercules wasn't a grim warrior. He was a bumbling everyman in a toga who just happened to lift mountains. Even his catchphrase, "Olympian strength," landed like a sitcom gag more than a heroic cry. Critics at the time dismissed the cheap animation and repetitive plots. Still, the show found life in reruns for decades, becoming a nostalgic oddity. Cultural impact? Modest, but it's remembered by those who grew up with it as Flintstones in sandals. Once again, the formula proved endlessly adaptable, even in mythic clothing. Linus the Lionhearted, 1964. Ever wondered what bedrock would look like if it was built out of cereal mascots? Enter Linus the Lionhearted, a Saturday morning cartoon spun out of advertising. Linus was literally the mascot for Post cereals, but on screen he became the leader of a suburban-like community of quirky animal friends. Every episode played like a Flintstones rerun in disguise. Linus dispensed fatherly advice, bungled through community events, and tried to hold the group together. His friends Rory Raccoon, Lovable Truly, and Sugar Bear fit neatly into sitcom archetypes. Even the plots mirrored Bedrock's formula: misunderstandings, comic schemes, tidy resolutions. What set it apart was the blatant cross-promotion. Characters would wink at their serial connections, making the whole show feel like Bedrock's neighbor who just happened to live inside your breakfast bowl. Critics blasted it as an extended commercial, but kids didn't care. They loved the bright characters and silly gags. The Federal Communications Commission eventually banned shows like it in the 70s, citing the conflict of interest between cartoons and advertising. Cultural impact? Odd but significant. Linus the Lionhearted proved how powerful the Flintstones model was. It could even be weaponized to sell sugary cereal. It was bedrock with a spoonful of marshmallows. Atom Ant, 1965. What if Barney Rubble put on a cape and shrank down to insect size? That's Atom Ant, a Hanna-Barbera creation that mashed superhero tropes with the same suburban comedy energy. Atom Ant was small, mighty, and constantly clashing with over-the-top villains in episodes that always wrapped up neatly by the closing sting. The Flintstones' influence was in the rhythm. Atom Ant lived in a tiny anthill house, worked regular routines, and blundered through battles like Fred blundered through bowling night. His villains, often bumbling crooks, played the same foil role as Mr. Slate or neighborhood pests in Bedrock. Episodes followed a predictable cycle. Villain hatches plan, Atom Ant intervenes, comic chaos unfolds, and balance is restored. The repetition was pure Flintstones comfort food. Critics saw it as derivative, but praised its light-hearted charm. It became a Saturday morning staple, packaged with Secret Squirrel in the Atom Ant Secret Squirrel Show. Cultural impact? Stronger than many clones. Atom Ant was merchandised, rerun, and remembered as one of Hanna-Barbera's more enduring knockoffs. It showed that even the superhero craze of the 60s couldn't escape Bedrock's gravitational pull. The Herculoids, 1967. Picture the Flintstones, but swap bowling nights for laser battles. That's the Herculoids. Hanna-Barbera leaned hard into science fiction adventure, but the bones of Bedrock still poked through. The family unit was unmistakable. Xandor the dad, Tara the mom, Dorno the kid. Even their bizarre alien pets, Gloop, Gleep, and the rest played the Dino role, comic yet loyal. Episodes followed the same pattern. The family faced a weekly threat. Aliens, robots, invaders bungled their way through resistance and prevailed with teamwork. The humor was lighter than typical sci-fi, closer to sitcom beats than pulp thrills. What made it stand out was the striking design. Alex Toth's art gave the series a bold look, and the strange creatures became cult icons. But in storytelling terms, it was still suburban sitcom logic pasted onto an alien jungle. Critics noticed. Some praised its imagination. Others shrugged at the recycled family. Dynamics. Kids, however, loved it. Reruns kept it alive for years, proving once again that the Flintstones template could wear any costume, even interstellar battle gear. Wacky Races, 1968. Take the Bedrock car gag and stretch it into an entire show. That was Wacky Races, a Hanna-Barbera series where a cast of oddball drivers competed in endless slapstick races. Fred's foot-powered car became 20 different gimmick vehicles, each with prehistoric-style comic contraptions. The sitcom DNA was obvious. Rivalries mirrored Fred and Barney's buddy bickering dynamic, with Dick Dastardly and Muttley taking the role of sitcom pests who never quite win. Each race played out like a Flintstones episode in disguise. Setup, chaotic middle, gag-fueled conclusion, status quo restored. What made Wacky Races memorable was its parade of quirky characters. From Penelope Pitstop to the Slag Brothers, every driver was essentially a sitcom archetype dressed up with a gimmick. It was community comedy, just on wheels. Critics dismissed it as formulaic, but kids loved the energy. Reruns and spin-offs like Dastardly and Muttley and their flying machines made it a franchise. Cultural impact? Immense. Wacky Races proved the Flintstones car gag had legs literally. It was Bedrock's bowling night, but stretched across highways and cliffs. To this day, its DNA shows up in everything from Mario Kart to modern cartoon parodies. So there you have it. 15 cartoons from the 1960s that tried to bottle the magic of Bedrock. Some soared into cult status. Others fizzled out after a season, but all of them prove just how irresistible the Flintstones formula was. From space-age suburbs to jungle planets, studios couldn't quit copying Fred and Wilma's suburban squabbles. Which of these forgotten copycats do you remember best? Drop your thoughts below, hit subscribe, and keep digging with us for more cartoon history gold.